The head of the Pentagon is threatening Iran with incredible barrages in the coming days. In addition, the Americans admit they need Ukraine's help in fighting Iranian drones. That's how things have turned out. In addition, Australia is sending troops to protect the Emirates, and Russia is trying to create a 20-kilometer buffer zone along the border of Sumy and Kharkiv regions. Ukraine will receive 35 missiles from Germany, Patriot, and much more, including Z-Wining, which deserves your attention. We'll discuss it today. I'm Alexander Prepodobny, and we're starting. Friends, Roman Tsymbalyuk, journalist and blogger, will be joining us today. Roma, hello, as always, we're glad to see you. Roman is appearing on our screens. But before we start discussing everything in detail, let's watch a short segment. Our colleagues have put together a digest of the most important events. Let's go.
US President Donald Trump had his first phone conversation this year with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. According to Reuters, they discussed the situation in the Middle East and Russia's war against Ukraine. Trump said that Putin expressed a desire to help with the Iran conflict, but the President of the United States advised the Russian president to end the war in Ukraine first.
It would actually be much more helpful if you could finally bring an end to the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. That would be much more useful.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov commented on the phone conversation between Putin and Trump. According to him, during the conversation, the American president did not put forward any new conditions for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Meanwhile, it became known that in Russia, no. The United States of America has acknowledged that it needs Ukrainian experience in intercepting Iranian drones to protect its bases in the Middle East. Axios reports that Ukraine offered to share its advanced technologies with the White House 7 months ago. But at that specific time, Washington ultimately chose to reject the proposal. Now, according to the publication's sources, American officials admit that this was a serious tactical mistake. The conflict around Iran is becoming increasingly intense. Despite Trump's hopes for the imminent capitulation of the Iranian authorities, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that Tehran not only does not intend to surrender, but also has no plans to stop the attacks. Moreover, he refuses to negotiate with the United States. After all, according to him, Iran has had a very bitter experience in dealing with the American side. The head of Iran's foreign ministry said that despite Pentagon strikes on nuclear facilities, the United States of America has neither managed to destroy the nuclear program nor stop the missile attacks. He also threatened that Tehran is ready to continue the attacks for as long as necessary.
So Roman Tsymbalyuk is joining our broadcast. Roma, hello again, we're glad to see you. So let's start with this piece of news. What could this call from Trump to Putin have meant? Perhaps Donald Trump finally sternly reprimanded the Russian president for sharing sensitive strategic intelligence with Iran. Or, as is usually the case, does he simply want to preserve his exceptionally close personal relations with Vladimir Putin? Just in case you know.
Hello. Well, first of all, they haven't spoken in a long time. As the Kremlin emphasized, it's been such a long time. There was such a long pause that everyone missed each other. Actually, I think the main issue was this. It was about increasing the presence of Russian oil on the world markets to somehow calm things down. Russia used to have a 10% share of the global market. Now it is less, but it is still significant. And I think this topic was the most important point, because one might assume that Trump asked Putin for some kind of mediation in Iran, or specifically with Iran. This scenario is highly unlikely, and if the American administration were to formally address this specific issue, then that would be a matter in itself, a complete fiasco. They started bombing specifically so as not to consult with anyone and not to take into account the interests of the Russian Federation. Therefore, I don't think there can be any fundamental decisions here, to be honest. And even regarding the subject of oil, as soon as there is completely unimpeded passage through the Hormuz Strait, anyone who has actually seen the exit from the Persian Gulf knows, in general, it's not exactly a bottleneck, but it is certainly quite a bit narrower than in most other places. So therefore, there will be even less sense in involving Putin. So they talked and talked. As for Ukraine, I don't see anything new at all. Even these trilateral negotiations have been postponed because, as it turned out, everyone is busy. I think we should just emphasize publicly, especially in front of the Americans, that we are actually shooting down those Shaheds that are attacking the United States' allies. And the Shaheds are exactly the same as the ones Putin is launching. Well, basically, that's enough to understand who's on whose side here, if anything happens.
Roma, let's also discuss Iran. It seems like they're ready to continue the strikes. They're stating this very confidently. Specifically, the head of the foreign ministry is saying directly from Tehran that they intend not to stop the attacks. What could Putin offer, in your opinion, including here to Trump? What kind of influence could he have on the course of this war? Apart from, of course, discussing the price of oil. Obviously, that's the top priority. Oil, gas, all the peaceful economies, people live there, but still.
Yeah, I really don't see anything at all. What could they even do? From time to time, propagandists there speculate, saying maybe we should deploy missile defense systems in Iran. Go ahead, deploy them. You can take them from Bryansk, or maybe you already have, judging by the recent strike on Bryansk. So, honestly, I don't see any real power in the Russian Federation in this situation. And to expect that this situation will change for the Russian Federation after a single phone call with Trump, that's not a given. Basically, Russia is not a real player in this region right now. For them, the Donetsk region is of much greater strategic importance, and maybe something else they have conceived within their own imaginations. But in all other parts of the world, it is simply the gradual and steady diminishing of Russia's political influence. So, well, they've had their talks now. From the press releases, we only see generic statements. It's unlikely that Putin can somehow contribute to winding down the nuclear program, especially considering, with a high probability, either partially or fully, Russia itself is, as we might say, actively involved in the ongoing life of Iran's nuclear program, so it is quite possible that some specific local issues were discussed in their discussion, but I personally do not see any major fundamental matters being settled here. We pay such close attention to this interaction simply because Donald Trump is the only Western leader who genuinely seems to enjoy sitting down to chat with Vladimir Putin.
Rom, well, Trump said that Putin would be better off stopping the war in Ukraine than helping Iran with intelligence or anything else. Well, that's a strange comparison in general, but it doesn't matter. How do you interpret this? Peskov said that they did not discuss the issue of a ceasefire in Ukraine. Can Trump presently exert any meaningful influence on Putin in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war? Now, if we move a bit away from the Iran agenda,
I actually think we've gotten a bit too carried away with this topic. A spruced up Bryansk, in my opinion, is still more interesting, especially when it comes to the factories there that it manufactures microchips for virtually the entire Russian military-industrial complex, and then 5 Ukrainian missiles hit it. In my opinion, that's actually a top news story, especially when it comes to Bryansk, especially considering that they want to create a buffer zone there. They want a buffer zone, and then something like this happens. As a matter of fact, if we are already discussing the American president, this specific observation he made that it would be much better if he focused on ending the war in Ukraine rather than attempting to play a mediating role in the Gulf, well, that just goes to show that the Americans perfectly understand the situation. They won't get anything from him. They won't get any cooperation. They won't get it because Putin has nothing to offer. He's just that, a naked Kremlin dwarf.
okay, here's something else I want to discuss with you. We even have a very interesting video about how Pushilin met with Putin. He summoned him for a serious dressing down, yet Pushilin was openly boasting about how wonderfully the temporarily occupied territories of Donbas and the Donetsk region are currently flourishing. Basically, he was saying how great and beautiful everything is. Let's briefly listen to these fantasies now, and then we'll discuss what it was all for.
It is abundantly clear that the damage over the last several years has been absolutely colossal. And the recovery is happening at a fairly rapid pace. I've had a chance to take a look. Well, we generally look at VContact, but I checked the data I have available.
Tell me, please, what was the purpose of this show? Why did they invite this, well, absolutely, I don't know, it seems to me, such a marginal figure to the Kremlin again? maybe here. Is it that the topic of territories will come up again? Or why did Pushilin come to Moscow?
Putin has a long-standing and well-established tradition of personally convening with the Gauleiters he appoints to the regions. And they aren't necessarily from the occupied territories. Sometimes these are internationally recognized Russian regions. Not occupied, let me emphasize that again. Yes, the thing is, they keep repeating some mantra about how Donetsk has improved, but that's just nonsense. At the very least, the key question Vladimir Putin should have asked is about water. But what interested him was the percentage of control over Donetsk region, how many square kilometers remain under the control of the Ukrainian army, respectively. So that's what interests him, but he doesn't care about anything else. And he also promised some Russian jerk an order, which is some kind of special state award, because in Putin's own opinion, and in the personal opinion of that idiot, he is a hero. So I really do not see anything in this whole situation at all. Let's be honest. The war goes on. The vast territory that currently remains under Ukraine's control is not restricted in any way by any territorial issues. If we manage to turn a piece of Russian territory into a buffer zone, then that's how it will be. So these mantras about them supposedly rebuilding something there, well, once again, they'll just show it on TV. Like wherever Putin is, something is always being rebuilt. But who brought this destruction? Who did? Well, the Russian army, of course. What exactly are they rebuilding? So the cities that were destroyed and captured after 2022, to be honest, it's not just that no one is rebuilding anything, they're not even planning to do it. So, well, yeah, they looked at the old man once again, just to make sure the old man doesn't die. That's probably all there is to it.
So Donald Trump, with just one statement that the war in Iran would end within a week, once again drove down the price of oil. Putin was already rubbing his hands together, but it's still too early to celebrate. In the context of, temporarily forgetting about Ukraine, I think that's a rather dangerous situation. We have to say that Ukraine will receive a new batch of missiles, the Patriot missile defense system, right here in Germany. Unfortunately, it is only 35 missiles, not the 600, like America deployed in the first week of this conflict against Iran. But nevertheless, from what you observe on the ground, have Europeans managed to keep their focus on Ukraine without switching completely to the Middle East?
I'm not even sure that we need to draw such comparisons here. When we look at these kinds of historical parallels, the situation is not simply measured by the total number of publications. That is exactly what political teams are for. Extensive administrative offices that can handle several complex tasks all at once. That is, when it comes to aid for Ukraine, Europe's position remains unchanged, and the volume and scale of this military and financial assistance are also unchanged. So attention, here's the question. Should we be upset because Iran, Russia's ally, is being bombed and there is less written about us? I think we need to focus on the substance of these negotiations and so on. There are no negotiations as such. We are receiving assistance. Who has switched their focus? No one has switched anything. Moreover, by all indications, this is a story that is far too painful for the world. War and blockade. Accordingly, the export of petroleum products is unlikely to last very long. That's why oil, as it has risen, will fall again. To be honest, I'm not really worried here at all, because if the price actually drops down to $30 per barrel, after Trump's words that the war will end soon, it only shows that this is an absolutely speculative story. That's how it seems to me. So we don't need to interrupt anything. We've seen this before. It happened with Venezuela and with Syria as well. And when Israel entered into its wars with terrorists in neighboring countries, it was always the same. This fear that everyone will forget about us. I think it would be better if everyone did forget about us, as long as they don't skimp on the missiles. And then when they remember, everyone will be surprised by the Ukrainian flag over Moscow.
Tell me, please, in the context of Ukraine not forgetting, is it strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation, primarily on military targets and oil facilities? There's no point in hiding it. I want to bring up Bryansk, which you mentioned today. Let me remind our audience that there were some very successful strikes on Bryansk. There was a microelectronics plant there called the Kremlin L Group. According to local social media, about 11 explosions were heard in the city shortly before the strike. By the way, the regional governor warned about a missile threat. So Bryansk is on the line, as you like to say. Roma, how important and essential is it right now to maintain this intensity of strikes on Russia? And from your perspective, since you're monitoring this, how is the Z propaganda reacting? Do they even mention it at all? Or has everyone already gotten used to it? To the fact that the border region is simply burning?
They're coming to a strange and very unpleasant conclusion. We must recognize that the situation both at the front lines and, accordingly, the depth of strikes on Russian cities can change rapidly. After all, the Bryansk region is still not the same as Belgorod. It is located a bit farther away, so I think this development is very, very cool and is very promising for the future. That is what the Bolo people are writing about. Regarding these ongoing military invasions, it seems the invasion is gradually losing its meaning and purpose. People are spending huge sums of money, significant finances are being wasted, countless lives are being ruined, and no one really sees any particular prospects in this. And this is the key point in this entire story.
Let's get back to the situation in Moscow for a moment. There is a fundamentally important region that for some reason has not yet really felt the impact of the war, and the movement of Vladimir Putin. Nevertheless, I read that in Moscow there are problems with communication. Local telegram channels report that it's already the 5th day. And in some districts, a bit farther from the city center, mobile internet is only partially working at all. So let's put it this way. It's hardly possible to order something or call for something if you want to. On some metro lines, they've even introduced a so-called whitelist. That is, these are websites and resources that are approved, as I understand it, by Roskomnadzor. Tell me, please, these white and black lists, what are they a continuation of? Is this an attempt to block all external resources in general? Or is it just, business as usual for Russian propaganda?
I just suddenly remembered once President Vladimir Putin had a phrase exactly like that. He was commenting on the protests in Paris and said, "What do you want? Do you want it to be like in France?" So regarding Russia, I want to say, you wanted it like in Iran? Well, now you've got it like in Iran. There are even frequent missile strikes occurring there now. And in this specific case, Bryansk can confidently apply for a formal sister city relationship with Tehran. Maybe they should find a much smaller town instead. There are actually a lot of different locations there currently being bombed by the Americans and Israelis. So yes, it seems Bryansk and Tehran are truly sister cities. Probably. That's what it looks like. By the way, it's the same in Iran. For the past 9 days, there has been no internet. So that absolutely no one at all can say or show anything and so on. But this is a clear example of states that are rapidly collapsing and failing, destructive states. Essentially, their primary and fundamental objective is to make their own citizens suffer first and foremost, as well as those around them. So here, there are absolutely no contradictions. It's a very common general trend to build a wall around. It is actually the nation of Russia that we are discussing.
Let's talk about Russia's money, but of course we're not going to study macro indicators, but let's say we'll use them as a starting point. Here's what is being proposed. The deficit of Russia's federal budget for the first 2 months has almost reached the annual forecast. It has increased to 3.5 trillion rubles, or 1.5% of GDP. Due to increased spending in February and the continued decline in oil and gas revenues, by the way, they keep falling despite the global oil price, which is also important for our viewers to understand. Overall, the hole in the treasury has exceeded last year's figure for the same period by almost a third, or 1 trillion rubles. What do you think about the financial resources that the Kremlin actually has at its disposal? Let's try to make some forecasts, or based on Putin's recent political statements, determine for ourselves just how resilient and stable the Russian economy really is right now.
First of all, Putin hasn't been making any political statements, not at all lately. In other words, he's been entirely and completely silent. And I think this silence, because they're keeping it so that the next time he appears, I'm not saying it will be next time, but the groundwork is being laid for him to say, we've already defeated everyone here, everything is fine, it's over, the special military operation is finished. Well, let's move to political and diplomatic options. I honestly don't know, but that is just how it seems to me personally, because the underlying assumption that they can continue to fight forever, in my humble opinion, is way overestimated, especially when you are considering, well, these specific mental characteristics of the Russian people. They pretend that it doesn't hurt them and so on and so forth. To put it simply, having no money means there is no money for war. If there's no money in the economy, there's no money for war, or at least a lot less of it. Plus, with the continuous and escalating series of military strikes occurring on Russian territory, well, that is a more than sufficient and compelling reason to carefully analyze and consider all the various proposals made by Trump and his associates together. But they don't make any proposals. Often it's based on our recommendations.
Roma, to wrap up, look, I think here the devil may be in the details because it's unlikely that Putin signs anything just like that. So Putin gets the right to send the army to countries where Russians are being arrested. Our audience explained what this is about. The so-called Government Commission on Legislative Activities has approved a draft amendment that will expand President Putin's powers to send the army for operations in foreign countries. According to the bill, from now on, Putin will be able to use the armed forces extraterritorially to protect Russian citizens in the event of their arrest, detention, criminal or other prosecution by authorities or courts that the Russian Federation does not recognize. In other words, they are supposedly, in quotes, granted authority without the participation of the Russian Federation. So honestly, what is this really about? What do you think? Why this legitimization? Why is this being done? Is he really planning to send something or not?
I think if they want to send something, they just do it. It's a dictatorship, after all. All the decisions there are purely formal. That's what private military companies are for. Well, maybe not are, but were. Accordingly, Russian special services have the legal right to operate abroad. Well, here we're talking specifically about army units. Well, it is possible that... Does Putin think he needs this option in case he is eventually kidnapped and sent to The Hague? He would be facing that warrant from the International Criminal Court, where they have been waiting for him for a very long time now, along with Igor Girkin, who is yet another so-called Russian hero. But if I try to summarize this complex situation in some way, I honestly do not see anything significant in these recent changes to the legislative framework in Russia. There are no hints of any, let's say, adjustments to the Reich. Well, yes, they're tightening something up over there, but in fact, they've already been doing this for quite a while, and everyone knows it. No matter how they write it in, what does it matter to us? We're only interested in the realities.
No, we understand perfectly well that we're in a situation where practice is ahead of theory. Just briefly, what do you think? Is this some kind of trolling threat to Western countries again? They'll read this news, won't they? They understand who this is aimed at, don't they?
We're in such a situation that for those who understand and those who don't, let me say one thing. If you see a Russian soldier on your territory, shoot to kill. That is the end of it. The entire justification for his actions, why he came on leave, listening to what his heart was telling him and so on, that is all secondary. The main thing is that he's here. And since he's not in Russia, he must be eliminated. Everything else is just talk. Talk and all these Reich games. We don't play those games.
Thank you so much. Roman Tsymbalyuk was with us today on the project In the Crosshairs.